Hello and welcome to this webinar on harnessing the potential of AI and data to promote student success and institutional growth. This is a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with Salesforce. I'm Eliza Compton, the Deputy Editor of Campus, a best practice platform from Times Higher Education, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. Joining me today are experts from academia and industry. We have Robina Xavier, who is Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President of Academic of the Queensland University of Technology.
Hello,
Martin Bean is CEO of the Bean Centre and former Vice-Chancellor of the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. And
Hi there,
Michael
everyone.
Perry is Regional Director of Education for APAC with Salesforce.
Thanks, Eliza.
So welcome everybody and welcome to our audience. There will be an opportunity to put questions to the panel for the final 5 to 10 minutes of the hour that we have today. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom and I'll do my best to get to as many questions as we can. But now to our topic at hand. AI and structured data now offer universities opportunities to create personalised student experiences as the technology continues to evolve. Student recruitment, retention, and lifelong learning are all undergoing significant changes as part of this process. But to properly enable student success, the right technology tools must integrate data from multiple sources without compromising security or efficiency. In the course of our discussion, our panellists will be offering their insights into the key challenges faced by institutions worldwide, including the ethical and privacy considerations that must be addressed while using AI. But to start us off, I have a question for the whole panel, but I am going to pose this to Martin first. What technologies are there out there for creating these new opportunities to manage and deliver on student success? I imagine that with your background in digital education and skills reform, you must have many ideas and insights around this area.
Yeah, thanks, Eliza, and hello, everybody. It's so good to have you live, and I know there'll be a lot of people watching us back afterwards, and you're probably speeding me up right now to 1.25 times the speed to get through me faster. But I think, Eliza, the best way to frame the answer, because I think this is a really exciting time for the intersection of technology and education, is to really focus on the fact that now it's a reality that we can have that 360-degree view of the student. You know, I really think of the life as a student as being across their learning and teaching, how we help them belong in the institution, all of the extracurricular, the activities, the involvement, but we often overlook the service architecture of the university as well. How can they get their questions answered easily, connect with the information they need, the people that they need, etc. And so that 360-degree view that unifies student data across sort of academic, extracurricular, and social sources, and we start thinking of it as a unified data set or one platform rather than disparate platforms, that really more and more can give us a real-time picture of the student, is perhaps the most exciting thing. And, you know, we've forever sort of thought about, we have these different systems in the university or the college or the school, whether it's sort of the LMS or the SIS or the CRM. And I think what's really wonderful now is that it's all sort of converging into much more of an integrated view of the world. And sort of underpinning that then are just a few other exciting areas, and then I'll let Robina and Michael sort of talk about it as well. But the whole area now of personalization driven by AI-powered engagement. You know, we've been talking about personalization in learning since the early 90s, but it's arrived. And the things that we're able to do now across tailoring communication, student support, student engagement at every stage across the student life cycle, from recruitment to alumni engagement, and what we can do to really enhance, augment, and enrich that entire journey would be the next thing. The other big one that I think you've got to be wary around the ethics, and we'll talk about that in a little while, but the appropriate application of predictive analytics to help institutions identify at-risk students, analyze them, behavioral and academic data, and really, instead of us being reactive and waiting for something to go wrong, really the technology allowing us to be proactive, and really improve retention and success rates, because we can get ahead of the game in helping and supporting our students. And then the last one is just really technology that helps open up our wonderful institutions to be able to provide services for lifetime support. You know, we historically have been very at a university level focused on 18 to 24-year-olds. Now we can really open ourselves up to 16 to 75-year-olds. And so, you know, there's a lot of great technology that is really liberating our ability to do a better job for our existing students, but also open ourselves up to students that we may not have traditionally seen as being core to our remit and impact. So there you go, Eliza, a few introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Martin. Yes, Robina, can I throw it to you now and your experience at QUT?
Sure, and I agree with everything that Martin said. That's really the way we're trying to frame it. If I could put a slightly bigger context around that, the way I'm trying to think about this is, how do we bring learning and living together? So we often talked about learning and working, but I think we're really trying to embrace the whole life of our students and see how all of that can inform what they do. And as Martin said, we're constantly balancing that preemptive and reactive aspects to what we do. But we know that coming to university is still a very big step for many people in the community. And so we need to look at all those transitions in, transition from first week to fourth week to first semester to second semester, and ultimately as you go, and then transition out to careers and then looping back. And I think being able to think about what people need at each of those stages and have our technology quite focused on how to make things available at the right times for people. We know we have so many different services, but it can be overwhelming for people to try and find their ways through that. So finding technology that can help do that, I think, is really important. And also for our academics and professional staff, it's such a rewarding process when they can start those conversations already knowing things about our students and being able to get to the crux of matters, rather than that constant "tell me all about your life" again that we've already told 3 people on the way through. And we know that students today want our services to mimic the services they're getting in the rest of their exchanges. They assume we can do those types of things. The thing I would focus also, though, on is I'm really passionate about student agency. So we provide all of those services and all of that help, but at the end of the day, we do work with adult learners, and we have to empower them to make the choices for themselves, and giving all of that support. And one of the things Martin and I often talk about is rethinking what success looks like under that student agency model. So what we might have thought as success is get your degree and walk across the stage at the end of the day. There's so many other ways that we could think about success in universities, and how our various technology systems can help make that more visible for people, and to start from a more positive aspect of things rather than sometimes a deficit mode, which we can sometimes fall into.
Thank you. Michael, can I bring in Salesforce here?
Yeah, I think it's been a fascinating 12 to 18 months for everybody. I mean, obviously, we're all well aware of how much work is about to change, but 12 to 18 months ago, I know we'll get onto the conversation of AI, but it was around the conversation was around plagiarism and focusing on those key areas, whereas now it's very much evolving into that change can absolutely be a change for good for everyone across all of our roles, and for the students as well. So Robina, you talked about student agency in terms of them being able to be empowered, and that's such a critical element to be able to deliver. So things where a student may have had many screens and taken lots and lots of clicks to actually get to a particular function that they need to deliver, we're starting to see those technologies being deployed right now, about a conversational discussion, a conversational assistant that I can ask and it delivers in natural language. Data silos everywhere, being able to harmonize that information and bring it to that single point that Martin talked about, everything grounded. The manual processes that we have still to this day, thinking about how you go, and there's always paper to fill out, so many areas of not just education, but the wider public sector, lots of manual processes. We want that to be able to take action. And then everything at the moment still is a little bit disconnected, as Martin was talking about. How can we make sure that for our staff, everything's in the flow of work so they can talk conversationally and have all access to all of that data? And then, as Rabina said, for the students, how can we make sure that it's all there for them, delivered and available to them in real time on an ongoing basis? That's how we can see those technologies changing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those responses. You have
Eliza, if I can
Yes.
just sort of double down on Rabina's point about it's really got to be about thinking about the whole life of the student. I just think, Rabina, that's dead on. It's impossible to think about sort of just the student in isolation of when they're in study mode, because it's just not the way life works. I often used to debate there really isn't any such thing as a full-time student. They've all got other things that they're doing. They've all got complicated lives, carer responsibilities, part-time jobs, all sorts of other things going on. So I think that's really so important that when we think about technology, we've got to think about it from a true user-centered design, to really think about what our students are really like now, rather than what we might have historically thought they were like. So I just thought that was a great expansion of some of the thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that brings us to so the next question is about the student life cycle, which I think all of you have alluded to, the fact that it used to be a much shorter time. And now, as Martin, you said, the life cycle might be from 16 to 75. We're looking at lifelong learning, and people are approaching education in different ways and at different times throughout their lives. And how can data analytics help institutions with this to optimize the student life cycle, so throughout that journey? Rabina, would you like to start us with this one?
Yes, well, we talk at QT about wanting to be the partner of choice for 50 years now. If you think about you come out of high school at some point, we all have to work now until we're in our 60s or 70s. So we think education needs to continue throughout that, and we'd love obviously for people to connect with QT through that. So thinking about those different life cycles, obviously through the systems that we've been implementing recently, we can see much more of that joined up data. So we can see how people engage, we can see when they're not engaging, we can predict within limits what success might help, or what might help success, and also what might place you at risk. So we can feed all of that back into our systems as well. And one of the really important things that I think our major Salesforce implementation has brought to the table is we've had different groups come to the table and actually have to interrogate what it is we do and think about how we do that. So we've literally just launched a new virtual help desk in the last 2 weeks. And we had hundreds upon hundreds of inquiry definitions that people would, or categories that people would pick. And they've brought that way down. I think we could probably go a little bit further, but way down to really understanding that, which then allows us to get a better sense of what people are looking for and how we shape that. So it's allowed us to do those different things. But again, the data that we can bring in to support our professional staff in the early engagement with students, very much the data that can support our academic endeavour, and as academics can see how people are engaging with their learning and teaching. And then as we want to stay in touch with people as they move on to those other areas, and we're creating marketplaces for people to continue to come back in and take up different learning. So I think that data is important, but I would put a caveat: we can get lots of data, we actually have to do something with it. So being able to just take it and then make sure it's getting to the right people and we're asking the right questions, I think is also really important.
Thank you. Martin, would you like to
as per usual,
talk
I
on
agree.
this?
Sure, as per usual, I agree with everything that Rabina just said, so I won't repeat it, but sort of your call to action there, Rabina, at the end of what you said, what we do with it. The interesting thing is big data and the ability to derive meaningful insights from big data is not necessarily new. Generative AI has democratized our ability to do it and sped it up. But I remember when I was at the Open University, which, back in 2014, we had 270,000 students. So we had a really big data set. We already had a unified CRM, and we were kind of ahead of the game in terms of taking siloed data and sort of creating a unified student data ecosystem. And one of the things we were able to do was to analyze what were the indicators of a student stalling in their study. And we realized that if they didn't hand in their first tutor marked assignment, which was the way all of our instructional design was built because they were all studying at a distance, that was a significant indicator that they would stall in that module. And so by understanding that and then doing some research about why they weren't handing it in, we realized it actually had nothing to do with our learning and teaching and everything to do with the fact that life had got in the way of those students. And so what we were able to do, Robina, was armed with that evidence and the great research behind it, we mounted a campaign of every time a student didn't hand in that first assignment, that tutor marked assignment, they'd get a proactive call, not from their tutor because they didn't want to admit to their tutor they were struggling. A very friendly person from student support would call them and say, "Hey, I'm Martin from student support. I saw you didn't hand in your first tutor marked assignment. We know that means there's a really high likelihood that something's going on in your life that's getting in the way. My job is to help figure out what we can do as a university to support you to make sure you stick with it and you succeed with your strategies. And by the way, there's about 1,242 people just like you right now. So you are not alone." And the impact of that one phone call in terms of engagement, persistence, retention, and completion was really quite remarkable. But it was only really made possible because we could derive those insights. And fast forward now to nearly 2025 with generative AI, the possibilities of drawing those insights to power the proactive engagement or interventions that Robina was talking about, that's really the call to action. It's really not about the data, the artificial intelligence, the dashboards. It's about what we choose to do now. And Robina, my way of looking at the cost savings of generative AI and student support is instead of thinking about how few a number of student support people we might need, I'm encouraging institutions to say, no, what if 50, 60, 70% of the mundane stuff they're doing gets taken care of by the Gen AI, and that frees them up to do more of the outbound, exciting intervention stuff to make a difference. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's certainly the way I'd be thinking about it.
I think that's true with our academic community as well. When you think
Yeah.
about a lot of the eighth time you get the same question about something where you can automate more of that and then have much more of that individual coaching and help for students on the types of things that are really important that only the people can do. So I do think getting that balance right is really important.
Mm-hmm. Michael, did you have?
I think it's really, yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to what Salesforce is seeing from across the globe, but particularly in Australia, is we do have throughout the institutions and many organisations, we have what we call islands of trapped data. So it could be that we start with the SIS, it could be the LMS, it could be linking on through the alumni piece, but it could also be things like the regulatory pieces and the regulatory items that the university needs to operate from a teaching perspective and from a human resources perspective. And then the engagement systems are critical to wrap around that. Data is so important, not just for the pieces that Robina talked about in terms of the academic progress, the wellbeing and sentiment, and Martin was talking about the academic progression of the student linked directly to that wellbeing, but also for us to be able to help as a university with career readiness, be able to then maintain that connection that Robina was talking about before, or Martin also from 16 to 70 years of age. And then also being able to wrap that all around with campus involvement. How can these students feel much more involved and see all of those different pieces, be it experiential, be it the philanthropy aspect, whether they participate on university or whether it's post, and have that meaningful involvement. All of that is possible to be driven by that single view that Martin's talked about before, and to be able to harmonise all that data and really give the university the opportunity to deliver that fantastic experience for the student.
I'm interested actually how agile the systems need to be in terms of offering the correct sort of support and working out what kind of interventions are needed perhaps. If you're talking about students outside the traditional sort of cohort, so Martin, you were sort of saying that something could be going on inside your, like in your life. That's very different and the potential things are different for a 19-year-old than they are for, say, a 35-year-old who might be in the workforce. Sort of in terms of data analytics and helping to optimize that life cycle, is there anything to add perhaps around that sort of agility?
Yes, I think Michael touched on it a little bit, that it's got to be more than the academic support that we're providing in the learning and teaching. It does need to sweep up more personalized support, to your point, Eliza, and that might include mental health resources. It might include career advice. It might include, how they may need to be able to navigate the existing resources if they've got learning challenges that need to be accommodated, so that they can access information and materials more effectively. I think the key to it is really understanding that the technology can only do so much, and then the humans need to kick in. And that's why having bandwidth so that you can have personalized conversations with people about bringing all that the institution has to bear to help them, but making that real for them by actually either automating how easy it is for them to understand and get access to the help they need, or letting them talk to a human being that can make sense of it and can give it context and can structure it in a way that gives them what they need. And I think as you design it, then you want to design for both worlds. You want to make it as easy as it can for people to have self-service, to be able to get out of the way a lot of those things Robina was talking about that can be handled 24/7 very effectively through technology, so that you free up the time to have the more personalized conversations. Because to your point, Eliza, everybody is different. There are themes, there are cross-cutting themes, and in spotting the cross-cutting themes, you can put support mechanisms in place. But for some people, there's no replacement to having that human-to-human conversation about what's going on and bringing the resources to bear in an effective way.
And
Yeah, and
Eliza, I think that if sorry, you go, Robina.
Oh, I was going to say, I think we should also circle back to what Martin said. I don't think we can underestimate how vulnerable our students can be at some of those points on the journey, and we have to capture it at that point in time, because often there is no next time. And the thing that always really makes me sad is when we will find a student who has exited the university without getting any help, or without asking for any help as well, because we take a lot of care to bring people into the university. We want them to be as successful as possible. And so being able to get them the right care at the right need, or the right answer, or just maybe a friendly voice that says, like Martin said, there's lots of people like you, don't feel alone on this journey. And we do know through the technology, we've been able to reduce the preparation for the calls that are made, for example, by about 50%, by being able to bring those systems together by that single view, which means the same group can make a lot more calls than they've been able to do. And that's where we can deliver that more personal service.
Mm-hmm.
Almost exactly what I was going to say. Technologies like, from an agility perspective, Eliza, as you were the point of the question, things like pulse checks or well-being checks can be done really quickly. That vast volume of data can then, particularly when you have that unified student ID, as well as all of those trends and indicators in that single view, you're able to see quite quickly those patterns that and themes that both Martin and Robina were talking about. Send out a pulse check, let's get ahead of the curve. And then because we've reduced the administration burden in other areas, as Robina said, by up to 50%, or reducing the number of query checkpoints or variations by hundreds down to a handful, we give the people in the teams the time back to spend it with the students and really dig into those key areas of concern. Did you know these resources were available? We can give that to the agent or to the person who's speaking to the student. Here's 5 different things we can do to help you. How can we put you in touch with them?
I wanted to think about also, in addition to student success, perhaps perhaps pedagogy, if it's or actual teaching and learning, if it's appropriate here, and to ask about how data and AI-driven insights can be leveraged to maximise student retention and attainment. So yes, both in terms of in the classroom, but also in the students' broader life experience, or the challenges that we all face trying to get through either education or I guess our work lives. Robina, can I direct this one to you?
Sure, and we've just brought our student retention team into our platform. So this is live for us. We're starting to see the results. But we've also had a major project running at QT for the last 12 months or so, where we looked at 5 of our major degrees and really said, we're just going to focus for a while on those and see what we can learn from all of the different data sources that we've had. We're using AI as some of that analysis, and then just good old talking around the table as you get the different people together. And we are actually now seeing some major shifts in those programs. We're pulling more students through than we have for many years into that second year and then into the third year. And we know that move from first year to second year is really important. But I also think in some of our learning aspects where we're now starting to use AI as virtual tutors, we're using it to help analyze student feedback more quickly. So all of that, again, is really providing some speed to action for us, to free up people to do things, and also not pass a burden onto other parts of our academic community or professional community to do things, to actually look at how we add the value through the use of technology.
Martin.
Yeah, no, I think all great. I think one of the areas that I love looking at the innovation is in the area of assessment. I think it opens up some incredible opportunities for us from an instructional design perspective to really double down on authentic assessment, both formative and summative, and be able to do things with more intelligent insights to really make assessment more meaningful to life and work than a lot of the historic ways we might have assessed students. I mean, at its nth degree, I get excited about the fact that the reason why everybody doesn't get a Viva, doesn't get interviewed by a couple of academic experts to have a great conversation to test their knowledge is because it's been very hard to scale it over tens of thousands of students cost effectively. While the use of generative AI, avatar technology, personalization, wow, the possibilities to be able to provide assessment that matches with the learning style and abilities of an individual, where we only ever assess them again on the stuff that they didn't prove to us they understood, rather than wasting their time to assess them on things that they've already proven to us that they're great at. That gets me very excited. The other area, though, and Robina, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but one of the things that students value the most is feedback along the way. And yet feedback is very time consuming for an academic to put together. And it's actually a marriage made in heaven with generative AI, because the academic absolutely knows what feedback they want to land where to help the student get the most out of it to improve moving forward. The Gen AI sitting to their side as their companion can really help bring meaning, context, and depth to the feedback in a way that speeds up the academic. The academic still has to be the one to make the decision based on what they're being shown as to the feedback that's required. But boy, can the Gen AI really enrich that and scale that in ways not possible before. And then, of course, synthesis. You take long threaded conversations in a course, the ability for both the student and the academic for those threaded conversations to be summarized and synthesized and meaning to be derived from them. Wow, it just speeds everybody up in good ways. So there's just so assessment, feedback, peer-to-peer, making sense of a lot of disparate information going on in the course or the module. Those are areas that I get really excited about because they're all possible now and they're all happening now. It's not a future thing, they're all happening now.
Yes, I think we'll see AI sitting next to our academics in so many ways. And we're, as like all things, there's people who race ahead and do amazing things and others who are, still learning along the way. But I think the other part for us is the human is still really important, though. So I think in all what we do, the academic or whoever it is still has to make those final decisions. But we also want to show our students how AI is going to be used in the professions that they're moving into. So, we will be mimicking that behavior in the work that we do as well. So I think all of that is coming together, and there's so many exciting initiatives coming through.
Martin, at a recent event, you were speaking or responding to a question talking about that assessment piece, and I hope you might share it again with this audience, because it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time in terms of our lived experiences and how that could, in a future sense, from an education perspective, contribute to a different form of assessment using AI. So we all have different skills. Do you remember that conversation? I found it fascinating.
Was that the one where I talked about you literally were sitting with the avatars, Michael, being interviewed by them?
That you started with that one, and then we all have different skill elements within our current roles. How much of that could be translated through to different components of accessible content as well?
Yeah, so one of the areas that's always been challenging for universities to work with is what we call recognition of prior learning, that most in this webinar will understand. And it's typically been a very subjective sort of analysis of a portfolio or a body of information put forward. These more 360 digital views of the student and what they've achieved throughout their life that Rabina sort of referenced a little bit before, more of a digital portfolio of everything that I've done in my study, in my life, in my work, in my volunteering, and starting to develop a longitudinal view of that. And then the machine learning and the AI being able to, in comparing that to other bodies of knowledge, being able to really bring a much more sophisticated view to who we are, what we've done, what our experiences have been, and of course, starting to link that to our recognition of prior learning models and assessments, so that what we're able to do is to not ask somebody coming back to us at the age of 35 to necessarily do a leadership module if they've just got an amazing body of evidence across their lifetime that they could be teaching the class rather than needing to attend the class. So I think it opens up all sorts of wonderful ways for us to allow people to shine and demonstrate the skills and competencies that they've got in fair and ethical ways, because we can sort of develop and control the algorithms to level the playing field. And I get very excited about that, Michael, because we want to draw as many people into education as we can. And Rabina, again, before sort of mentioned these, and almost an infinite number of on-ramps and off-ramps to our university. We don't have to think about failures anymore. We can think about achievement at much more micro levels and celebrate those achievements at more micro levels, because through micro credentialing and badging and modularization and pathways, it's more of a journey than it is an episode. And I think in many ways, that's the way we need to think of it. Our job as education institutions is curate and enable a journey, a lifetime journey, not a series of disparate episodes, Michael. So I hope that's the one you were thinking of. If not, you can remind me later, and I'll put it in my kit bag.
It's exactly where I was hoping to go, because
Right.
from a maximizing retention and attainment, and I've got a personal view that I think that if we can particularly the 16 to 70 or 16 to 60, however long we want to keep working, learning, if we can make sure that we're aligning it to either their current or even their interests and likes, and be able to demonstrate, well, I have these capabilities. And then going back to what you were saying before in terms of adapting the assessments to be able to, we only need to see these pieces through your prior RPL. You haven't been able to demonstrate these elements. We're going to assess you on this and be able to join those two together. It's a fascinating area of opportunity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think continuing on this theme, I would like the panel's thoughts on how universities can use these insights and also tools, sort of thinking from the other side of things, of how they can shape the course offer. to provide for this new lifetime learning. And it seems to me it is a different way of thinking about the curriculum, or a different way of thinking about courses. So how does that work, perhaps in the opposite direction, that we have all this data and can we use it then to reshape what we're teaching and how we're packaging that? Martin.
Yeah, look, and I think that, back to Robina's point, there is no substitute for the academic. So the way that we design the courses and the programs, and the way that we choose to surface the data for the student in meaningful ways to give the student agency to scaffold them for success, that remains the domain of the academic, because what we know through all of the research is that UX, that user experience through digital windows into our learning, and the way that we structure it and scaffold the information, the sequencing, the signposting, the type of information and the type of content delivery, the conversations, the discussions, the assignments and the assessments, the way that is put together will make or break the success of the course and the program. Now, my personal belief on that, Eliza, is that there are certain minimum, if you think of it through the lens of a learning management system, every course needs to adhere to that institution's minimum standards for what that student experience needs to look like, and the scaffolding of that, because that's just elegant. That's what they're going to, that's going to delight them, because they'll be able to move through courses and programs and not have to relearn the way the university presents themselves to the student. But then on top of that, it's incredibly important to let 1,000 flowers bloom. So the really contemporary universities that I'm working with are the ones that deeply understand what the foundational scaffolding needs to look like. They support their academic community to ensure every course and every program hits those minimums, because they know it's going to support the success of any type of student. But then within guardrails, they really unlock the potential of almost an infinite number of tools and methodologies that each academic can make their own based on what they want to achieve with their students in the program. And I think that balance between prescription and permission is sort of where the best universities are that I know that are unlocking technology in learning and teaching.
Thank you. Yeah, Robina, can you kind of add perhaps on how these sorts of tools are being used to streamline that journey to making sure that the kinds of learning that is required or demanded by students or industry is provided by the institution?
Yeah, so I think as Martin said, I don't think we do recognise prior learning very well as a sector, and I think if we can crack that, I think that opens up a lot. We have an enormous amount of gems sitting in our learning management systems, and if we think a little bit more about modules or smaller pieces rather than even a unit or a subject, we call them unit subjects, and being able to search through that and make that more visible as we think about things that are changing in a profession or in your own life that you're interested in things, being able to tap back into the university and being able to find that and being able to engage with that, I think that helps open the lifelong learning for us more. I mean, I'm not a believer that the undergraduate degree will disappear. I know, some people do, but I'm not in that frame. But I do think postgraduate education is a whole other world for most areas, and so I think being able to find ways to more immediately find what you need or what you think you would like, and being able to package that back up. And nobody has time to be searching all that internally on a manual basis. So I think being able to find ways to have all of our systems searchable through that and highlighting different things. We're talking today about AI. As these different things come through, well, everyone can surface what's happening. And then we can also see where the gaps are. We can see, industry X or industry Y is really powering ahead on this, and we have nothing sitting here on that. Should we or could we? And I think the other part is for us to curate more rather than create. We do a lot of creation, and that's really important. But if we think of ourselves as a global ecosystem or even a national ecosystem, how could we join expertise up and not always mimic what others are doing, but connect our graduates or our alum into areas where others have that expertise as well. So I think all of those things become more possible as our systems talk together and we think about how the user experience, as Martin said, comes through.
So does that come back to what you were talking about before, Michael, about breaking down the silos and making the data that might not have been visible much more accessible?
It's exactly right. And Rabina's point about being able to bring that data to a single point, Martin's talked about it earlier as well. Tools like Data Cloud that Salesforce has brought to the market in the last 12 months are critical for that. It means that you don't need, as an enterprise or as an organization, you don't need to re-platform everything. Rabina just talked about the absolute gems that are available to the university inside the LMS. By connecting the systems up through tools like Data Cloud, or if we need to join it up a little bit stronger with something like MuleSoft to be able to make sure that we can send the information forwards and backwards, doing that gives us that single view. So a unified student profile allows us to be able to see, and them to be able to see their academic process, be able to start working with them on their career readiness, talking about those gaps, add in the RPL components that both Martin and Rabina have talked about, keep that engagement going in a personalized journey. So once we know all of these different pieces along the way, we have all of those systems coming together. And then the communications that we can continue on beyond their initial academic journey can continue as alum, and reintroducing them into micro-credentialing, all of those different aspects that we talked about. It's really important to understand that those tools are available today for universities to be able to connect up all of those individual islands of trapped data that I talked about earlier to deliver that 360-degree view that Martin's referenced.
Absolutely. Thank you. We are talking about AI and data collection, and one of the questions that comes up around this often is concerns about privacy and ethics. And so I did want to ask the panel what the universities and systems providers are currently doing, or perhaps will be doing more of in the future to manage AI and data with regards to privacy and ethics. Perhaps, Martin, can we start with you?
Sure. And there's really 5 core things I talk to institutions about in this area, Eliza. So the first is ensuring transparency, making sure that AI decisions are explainable and clearly understood by all stakeholders, really to build trust. Trust is foundational for most change efforts. The second is to combat bias, so regularly audit your AI systems you'll never fully prevent bias, but to do the best you can in areas like recruitment, grading, student success predictions, constantly be looking as much as you can for the bias. As you've already talked about, just prioritize data privacy. You've really got to have strong data governance and seek explicit, transparent student consent and staff consent for data collection and use. It's why choosing technologies that you can really count on to keep the data within your firewalls, within the boundaries that you want to set for it, is just so fundamental. And a lot of organizations I work with outside education are not doing a very good job with that at all. One that I think Rabina and I are in violent agreement on is you got to keep the humans in control. So you've got to use it to support human decisions, not replace them, to ensure empathy and context in the decision making. And number 5 for me is just you've got to have the guidelines. You've got to have the ethical guidelines, and universities are really good at this. We've spent decades and decades understanding that we need ethical guidelines to do our work across research and innovation and learning and teaching. But it's one thing to have the guidelines, but we've also got to be prepared to train and develop all of our staff, academic and professional, in how to bring those guidelines to life to really ensure the responsible and fair use. So transparency, bias, data privacy, humans in control, and ethical guidelines and enablement. Those are the things that I typically talk to people about.
Thank you. Rabina, can you talk on?
Yes, I would agree with all of that, and I think Martin's last point is really important. You know, we're big communities, and so we do have people at all different stages of this journey. And there's been a great study recently done, including two professors at QUT, Abby Cathcart and Paula McDonald, and teams from across Australia, looking at just how prepared our sector is. And it really shows that there's people who are very well informed and are doing wonderful things, and those still questioning whether they should be engaging in AI at all. So we have to be able to span that. I think the transparency is really important to me, and we also really make that clear for students. If they're using AI in their assignments and things, they have to tell us about it. Well, I think we have to do the same thing. Where we're going to be using AI, we need to be clear. Now, recognizing it will be ubiquitous in many of our systems, that it becomes a little bit more complicated, but we do need to ensure there's a human in the process. The only other thing that I would add probably to what Martin said is we also have very strong sustainability agendas within our university, and we know that the AI models are using huge amounts of energy, and so we do need to think about again how that balances out. And we also know the theft of private imaging and knowledge that has happened in the development of some large language models. And that's a really big concern for us. So, certainly the ethical development of these models. So it's a little bit like trying to put the plug back in the bottle now, isn't it? But, I think we don't want to see that continue. We want to try and get our hands around that as much as we can.
Yeah. Michael.
I think it's fascinating. Some global research, we've referenced it prior, gives us the insight that sort of circa 90% of students and staff are very excited about the opportunity for AI, whereas only circa 25% of institutions are probably ready for the security aspects that both Martin and Rabina have talked about. The challenge we have is that sort of nearly 60% of people are already using it in their day-to-day life. So this is here from an institutional perspective. It's critical to realise that if there's a faster, better way for the majority of people to do their role, they're going to find that. But as Rabina talked about, that can have ramifications in terms of IP theft and institutional security aspects. One of the key things that Salesforce has built is a trust layer. So it's our number one value as an organisation. Trust is absolutely critical in terms of everything that we do. QUT is an example. We handle vast quantities of their data, but it's their data. It's not our data. It's not our data to analyse or interrogate or interpret to be able to improve. It's QUT's information. So at no point through the Salesforce trust layer does privately identifiable information, PII, get out of that system. Should we need to send that through to an AI agent to be able to use, we de-identify it, ask the question, and then bring it back in. So it's absolutely critical that, as Martin said, everyone has that full knowledge of what we're using it for. The majority of people are excited about that opportunity. So if we ask for that, explain it very clearly what we're doing, I'd be staggered if we didn't get fairly high rates of consent, because people are going to be able to see how they can then, through that harmonised journey, get much better outcomes for themselves, for their roles, for their careers, as students or employees. So it's a really important fundamental part that we need to make sure we get right, is that trust and where is your data sitting.
Thank you very much for that answer. I've come to the end of my questions, but we do have one question from the audience, and I do have others in my back pocket. But our first question is for the panel. What data are you capturing to enable maximum retention besides the first assignment submission that you mentioned? So the question does specifically mention Salesforce, but I think I can open this question to the panel, perhaps to Rabina. Yeah, what else are you capturing to help with the retention? And you have had success, as you were saying, at QUT with this.
Yeah, we also do. We have the 3 stages of our program, which is get on track, stay on track, and get back on track. And our student success teams run with that. So they capture data at different levels for that. And as students come into the university, we ask them about a whole range of things to try and help them understand what their help-seeking behaviour is. And when they complete that, that can also then link them up to relevant services. So, you know, they don't have to do it, obviously, but it's a value add where it is. Like Martin said, we can see around different units where how they engage with different assignments. If you don't do well in, you know, the first assignment, what's your likelihood of doing better along the way? We can see how you're engaging with Canvas sites and participating in various things. So there is a range of data that we can use that. And I think as we capture more and more data, then we see more of that as well.
Thank you. Martin, did you have
Yeah, just a couple of
something to
other
add
thoughts.
here?
Whoever asked the question, just
Violet
because,
Lim.
sorry, who was it?
Violet Lim.
Hey, Violet, nice to meet you. I think one important caveat I'd put in is just because you can capture the data doesn't mean everybody gets to see it. So the best practice for me, it's sort of like that Spider-Man quote, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. So ideally, with consent, you want to be capturing sort of the information you know about the student when they join the institution. That might be things about their background. It might be about their learning challenges. It could be about socioeconomic risk factors, really some pretty personal, private, and confidential information that should only be seen and shared with a small number of people in the institution. But it's important to be able to have it when you need it. You, of course, add to that then what you can observe of the student in their academic life that Robina has talked about. You can see a lot about what they do in their extracurricular activities and their interests and the way that they work with other parts of the institution and their volunteering, some more of their social sources, etc. You can obviously look at where they're going and looking for help, and you can draw inferences about how we might be able to help them more because they seem to not be finding what they're looking for. So there's almost an infinite number of data sources that you can bring to bear in the 360-degree view. The real ethical questions are, though, how do you make sure that it's informed consent when you're gathering it? How do you make sure that only the people in the institution see the right information or the right analytics they need to see given their role in the institution? And then how do you use really strong research and evidence behind it to ensure that the interventions or the decisions that you're making on the back end are the right ones because they're grounded in evidence and action and feedback over time to inform those decisions. So it's really not a lack of what can be gathered. It's much more around the other things that I've just mentioned from my perspective, which is why when you bet on platforms to help capture the data, make sense of the data, report on the data, they need to be quite sophisticated. Because if you start running up this sort of information on a disparate set of docs on people's hard drives or scattered across the university without the appropriate amount of data protection, privacy, etc., that can get pretty risky for you and the people that you serve as well.
Can I just reflect back on that as well, Martin? You reminded me. We can tell from the various programs we run to support students that pretty much every single program adds value once they touch it. So the real challenge for us is how do we get them to touch it? Because once we've got them engaged in the programs, from very simple things to very complex things, it will add value. So that's part of that early aspects as well of knowing some of the profiling that will help us to identify who's more likely to reach out, who we may need to reach out more to through that process. So we know the value is there if we just can connect more of our students to it.
Thank you. I did have a follow-up question to that one, which is, I think for Michael, which is Salesforce acting just as a CRM, or does it handle things like invoicing and unit enrollments and things like that?
So there's a range of different functionalities that Salesforce has. We have lots of skills and specialities across a range of different sectors. So the platform itself is incredibly modular. Going back to what Martin said, the data that we can, and Violet's question before, the data that can be ingested is almost without limit. There are institutions all over the world using the platform for all sorts of different aspects, from student records, student management, communications, all the way through to the field service aspect and running the institution itself. Light bulbs need to be changed, plumbing aspects need to happen. There's lots of scheduling capabilities in there. And yes, the fiscal components as well can be added in depending on the synchronization needed or the alignment with, say, a financial records system. But again, it's about being able to connect that data together. So let's go back to what Martin was saying. One of the critical components is control over who has access to what. If we've got all of that financial information coming either from a financial system or being held within Salesforce as the primary record system, we need to make sure that there are very strong hierarchical controls, and the platform has that in spades, from things like, let's take, as Martin said, we might need certain people within the community to have access to student grades, a very select few community members to have access to things like private and confidential communications between a student. Similarly, in, say, a public sector lens, we have all of those hierarchical controls for government, and then in the commercial landscape, the platform can be adapted in many different ways, tailoring specifically to what the individual institution needs.
Great, thank you. We've got a question here for Martin, but if Robina, perhaps if you have something to add, please do. The question is, what strategies do you employ for students who aren't doing well academically, but also maybe aren't easy to contact or even fall off the radar entirely?
Oh, look, that's an absolutely brilliant question, because a lot of, particularly the younger students that we work with now, they don't communicate the way that we normally communicate. People of my generation. I was laughing with the panel, Eliza. I turned 60 on Saturday, so I'm the last of the baby boomers, 1964, and communication was very different for us. So I think that you've got to meet them where they live is perhaps the best way to describe it, Eliza. You've got to be able to get your communication to them through the channels that you know are going to get cut through for them. It's part of why Robina was talking about her success in using automated technology for, frontline student questions, because it's functioning 24/7. It doesn't sleep. You don't have to wait until Monday to make a call. You can get that response as and when you need it. But I'm also a huge fan, Eliza, though, of having your primary communication source for a student. So, and for me, that often is the learning management system. If the learning management system is the place that they have to go to have their programs scaffolded, their courses scaffolded, and if you need a place to get messages out, that is the place they will go to. But the bottom line is you've got to be able to push key messages out in multiple ways, because you can't simply rely on sort of one institutional preferred mechanism to communicate with them. You need to adopt a very contemporary mindset to how you do that. And then the final thing I'll say is give choice. The more you can offer your students choice as to the way, what their preferred communication method is, and then tailor the way that you communicate to them based on their preferences. Final point, though, is Robina's point around agency. There is a responsibility for being a student. The institution can do everything that it possibly can to make it easy and effective to communicate. But at the end of the day, the student needs to accept some responsibility for their engagement with the course, the program, the institution, and also take their part in the communication process as well.
Fantastic. I think we have a minute. So, Robina, if you wanted to add anything quickly to that,
yes, I was just going to say
is counting down.
Yeah, I think only other point, because I agree with that, is we often use students, either current and or recently past students, as part of all of that communication as well, because we know our students open up to other students, and often will make that makes the first transition easier, and then staff can add on to that. So I think all universities now are using student as partners models through this.
Fantastic. Well, this has brought us to the end of our hour. So all that's left to do is to say a great thank you to our audience for joining us, and also obviously to our panelists. So Michael, Martin and Robina, thank you so much for being part of our discussion today.